But here we have the third sign we're looking at today in John's Gospel, the book of signs. 7 signs that point to the fact that Jesus is God's Son and has come into this world to change it and call people to follow him and respond to what he's teaching. Remember, these signs point us to Jesus, but he looks for faith that is based on trust in who he really is, the Son of God. And so we come to this third sign, this healing at the pool of Bethesda. Quite interesting, this, when I was in Jerusalem in 1999, this pool wasn't there. It was quite strange. It was only discovered, in the year 2000, and they began to excavate it. So it's quite interesting because there was doubts. If you read books that were written about this miracle 20 odd years ago, there would have been some doubt expressed about where on earth this pool was, and yet it's exactly where it was described. That's what it would have looked like, just outside the temple. I would imagine from that artist drawing there would be a few more buildings around it, but it was a 2-tier sort of thing because of the hill, the topography of it at the time. But we've got this scene in there. It's a strange pool in many sense, is that it just wasn't a Jewish healing pool, it was a pagan healing pool as well. Other people from other religions went there because of these waters that were disturbed, and people generally believe the myth that an angel every so often came down and disturbed the waters, and that was a time for people to get healed if they got in quickly enough. But we all know that there are lots of places around this world, including a few in Britain, that have got similar pools, haven't they? Bath and various other places where the thermals come up through the rocks into these pools and sometimes heat the water but cause bubbles and everything else. But it was one of those places. It was a known place of healing, and people went there, were taken there to get healing, possibly, sort of giving them hope. But of course, if we really looked at it, it wasn't that particularly successful as a healing place. But people hung on to it. And this man had obviously been sick a long, long time and was obviously a regular at the pool. So we get the story of Jesus healing him. Let's just read the verses. Later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for another Jewish festival, and here we've got it in John's Gospel that Jesus is keeping travelling from Galilee to Judea. The other Gospels don't reflect that. But he's gone for one of the festivals, and we remember, I hope, that Jewish people felt they needed to go to worship in the temple at some of the festivals as often as they could. So the blind, the lame, the crippled people were lying near the pool. Besides the pool was a man who had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw the man and realised that he had been crippled for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to be healed?" The man answered, "Lord, I don't have anyone to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. I tried to get in, but someone else always gets there first." Question I want to ask him is why didn't you lie nearer the water? You know, you get the impression he can't move a lot. Why is everybody beating him into the water? Surely over those years he would have known it was better to get near the water where he perhaps would have been able to get into it first, just roll in. But, well, we don't know the answer to that, Matt. But Jesus asked this question: do you want to be healed? You know, he challenges him as almost he's a bit of a shirker. You know, he's an ill, but he wants to remain ill. He's happy with his lot. He would have got some income from begging and everything else. You know, is that he sort of puts on a front and, yes, I want to be healed, but doesn't really. That's the emphasis that's got there. You may think, well, that's quite cruel, isn't it? About Jesus challenging here about does he want to get healed, and he makes excuse. But why wasn't he nearer the water? We don't know the real answer to that at all. But clearly the man was surviving by staying at long periods at that pool. As we read in the other gospel stories, particularly in John, what Jesus fulfills here by healing the man fulfills the hopes and longings of the Jews. Strange enough, here, however, Jesus seems to be filling the hopes and half-formed beliefs of pagans as well, which is quite an interesting thing as well. This was a centre of people wanting a healing, but coming from all sorts of beliefs. And there is a sense, I think, where people are longing to be healed, and so are prepared to wait for long periods. We don't know how often the water stirred, but not that often. When it did, some people may have been healed, but the records don't show that it was a regular healing place. It's quite interesting, you know, I was in a house group this week. I went to see the Magic Flute. It's not the first time I've ever been to an opera, I must admit. It's quite interesting. It wasn't as bad as I thought it might have been. Because when I booked the tickets, I thought it was a ballet. Oh dear. So anyway, with my friend Megan, we went along, and it certainly helped that it got subtitles when they sang, which was good. So that definitely helped. It's quite interesting. But the Magic Flute is quite a dark opera, written by Mozart towards the end of his life. He'd moved out of Germany, where he'd seen great success, looking for more fame and fortune in the court of the new Austrian king in Vienna. And whilst he was there, he soon got the hang that if you wanted to get on in life, the way to do that was through Freemasonry. There was a big Freemasonry guild in Vienna that most of the popular people belonged to. And so Mozart joined that. And this opera, you can see elements of Freemasonry in it. The story is about a prince who's seeking to rescue the daughter of the Queen of the Night. He's told about this princess who's been captured and in the hold of a senior Freemason, and falls in love with her and sets out to rescue her with a bird catcher called Panadero, who's quite a comic character. And so in amongst this darkness, there's a lot of comedy that carries it along. But to rescue this princess, he has to go through some forms of initiation of the Freemasons. So he can go up the social scale to more enlightenment, more understanding of life through these trials, I suppose you could say, and secret initiation ceremonies. So it's quite a dark thing and follows something of the early stages of Freemasonry in Europe. So it's quite dark. And he goes through these, and of course through the darkness, depression comes and everything else, although it all ends up happily ever after. But I thought, as I was seeing that and in my preparation for this thing, this is what was going on very much at this pool and in this scenario of the pool. Because as Jesus does that, we have to ask the question, let me go on because I've gone elsewhere. Did Jesus deliberately choose to heal this man on a Sabbath? The whole healing was overshadowed by the man carrying his mat. But Jesus got the attention of the Pharisees because it happened on a day. We've got this situation where Jesus, it would appear, has done this miracle to this man that wasn't all that keen on getting healed, deliberately on a Sabbath, to provoke the Pharisees and to challenge the Pharisees into a debate. Because I think that's what part of all this is about. Jesus heals the man who doesn't particularly want to be healed, that's not a particular follower or interested in Jesus' mission, specifically to challenge the Pharisees. The Pharisees, remember, are this elite leadership group in Jewish culture that control the religion, that control the Jewish people's relationship with God. And they see that the way to get nearer to God is to progress up the social Jewish ladder. The better you become a Jew, you do that by obeying all the laws the Jewish establishment have laid down. And that's why so many of these laws are ridiculous. There are hundreds of laws controlling what you can do and what you couldn't do on the Sabbath. Most of them totally ridiculous. But of course, because the Pharisees are always challenging people about obeying them, they alleviate themselves in the social structure of Judaism at the cost of people developing relationships with the living God. There's a sort of evilness about what is going on in Jewish society. And this is what Jesus is doing, challenging the establishment in this miracle. The miracle wasn't just for the sake of the man, it was for the sake of the Jews, to get them to understand that the way they were leading the Jewish people was all wrong. Let's go back a bit. Later, Jesus sees the man and wanders off in the temple. And Jesus says to him, "You are well now, but don't sin anymore, or something worse might happen to you." So what is all this about? What is illness to do with sin? Well, we've got to understand that in this particular occasion, his illness probably was because of son's sin. Not all illnesses today are the result of sin, but I think we might recognise that some are. There's lots of lifestyles around today that are not good for our general health, are they? Let's take a simple one, smoking. I think the world knows now that smoking is not good for you. And if you smoke, there's a high chance that you might get lung cancer. If you drink too much, there's a good chance you will damage your liver and develop cirrhosis. These are lifestyle options. If you drive madly around on a motorbike, there's a chance you'll get killed or seriously injured. These are lifestyle choices, and there must have been lifestyle choices back in Jesus' day that caused people to get sick. We'd imagine he couldn't walk. We don't know what he's doing. But this doesn't mean that if we're sick today, we've committed sin. Let's make that clear. We don't know that. And we should never look at illness in that way. But whatever the cause, Jesus is still looking to heal us, whatever our sickness might be or whatever the cause of it may be. So we must be aware of that. And it comes up in this particular passage that Jesus considered this man's illness a sin. But this is not the same for everyone. Remember, this is a sign that the Apostle John has written down in order to direct us to the full mission of Jesus. So the outcome of the miracle was twofold. The paralytic was healed and a controversy was precipitated. That's what we need to it, because it took place on the Sabbath. The other thing, just to note, there are other times when Jesus healed and controversy was about, like the next one we will look at, that Jesus doesn't confront the authorities. He fades away into the distance. But on this occasion, he decides to confront the authorities, to bring out what Jesus was about, to start to debate with the Pharisees and the leaders the Jewish spiritual condition. Because the entire scene speaks of the spiritual condition of the Jewish nation and is still as relevant today as it was then. If we think about it, Jesus could have avoided this controversy by healing the man the day after. The man had been sick for 38 years, another day wouldn't have made much difference anyway, would it? But we got this in Jesus deliberately, I think, heals this man on the Sabbath, tells him to pick up his mat and walk into the temple to challenge the authorities. Let's just read about that. The man left and told the leaders that Jesus was one of those who had healed him. When the Jewish leaders saw the man carrying his mat, they said to him, "This is the Sabbath. No one is allowed to carry a mat on the Sabbath." But he replied, "The man who healed me told me to pick up my mat and walk." They asked him, "Who is this man that told you to pick up your mat and walk?" But he did not know who Jesus was, and Jesus had left because of the crowd. They started making a lot of trouble for Jesus because he did things like this on the Sabbath. And then Jesus goes on to explain that God never stops working on the Sabbath, and as God's Son, he's following in his Father's work. So here we have this challenge all because this man carries a little mat around on the Sabbath. The Jewish authorities go out of their world and they eventually track down Jesus and challenge him. So, what is this sign? Is it Jesus pointing out that there will always be trials ahead for all those who follow him? I think that's certainly a possibility. If we follow Jesus and we stand up and follow in his teaching, we're obviously going to come into conflict with the authorities. And as his disciples, we need to be aware of this. And I'm sure we all are. Or is this a sign about the identity of Jesus? Well, I think it's more of that than it is about warning us about trouble ahead. This is all about Jesus. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. And that's the emphasis, I think, that John is teaching here, teaching us to know that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. And let's face it, the church has struggled over the Sabbath for years, hasn't it? You know, the way that Christians look at the Sabbath now is far different than it was in my younger days. Very restrictive. That came in with the Victorian era. That great period in English history when sometimes we think everything was okay and we should all follow on like they did in the Victorian times. Well, I'm glad we don't really. I don't know, if you go and see, another good film to go and see is Victoria and Abdul. That's an interesting story, apparently very true, and a story that was suppressed during her lifetime because all the advisors and the Queen's sons around at the time didn't like Queen Victoria's relationship with this Indian servant. Not that there was anything improper in this relationship, but just so happens that Queen Victoria found she could talk to him. And when you look at it, you realise that, and I'm sure it's true, that Victoria at the end of her life was in a very lonely place and needed somebody just to talk to about ordinary things and give her a new interest in life. But it was suppressed.
Was it similar to that other film?
About the Scottish man? Yeah. It's a very similar relationship. She'd gone on with John Brown, didn't she? There's no suggestion of any moral lowering of her standards, Victoria. But there again, this relationship with these people gave us something extra in life. Somebody to open our heart to, because everybody else around wasn't interested in that. You know, that was the thing. So, and I've completely lost my track now, what we were talking about. Lord of the Sabbath. This is it. We can't look at this and think we've got the Sabbath perfect. Because the church in the past, throughout the world, has got it wrong. And because it's wrong, they've put people off of following Christ, haven't they? Because of the austere ways. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's right that everybody works now on a 7-day-a-week sort of thing, but we did need to ease up on some of the rules and realise that Sunday is another day of the week, but it's there for those to worship God, and those who want to worship God should be prevented from without problems about that, although that isn't very true today, is it? That For Christians who want to worship God on a Sunday without the fear of losing jobs and everything, should be allowed to do so without any threat over them or disadvantages around in life. But let's face it, life is always problematical in these areas when people want to follow Jesus. So this is a sign about Jesus being Lord of the Sabbath, and he's in charge of the Sabbath. But as the signs build up, so the reaction to them becomes fiercer. Disciples begin to realise just what it will to cost to follow where these signs are pointing. That's what we need to look at when we read John. It's these build-up of signs. We're on the third one. The next week is the feeding of the multitudes. That there's a build-up of these signs as they point out that Jesus is God, Lord of the Sabbath, Lord of creation, as we will see next week.